So we're going to go through Flexibility 101, going through loads of information so that you can better understand flexibility and different types of stretching, so that just by having that knowledge and better understanding, you can put that into practice and understand more about what you're doing and why with your flexibility goals. So I'm going to be referring to my notes. I've written down loads of things that I wanted to share with you. The first thing is I kind of define flexibility and stretching in kind of two different ways. So I will do stretching for maintenance and stretching for developmental. So the developmental is where I want to increase my range of motion, increase the mobility in my joint, increase my flexibility. So maintenance is where you are keeping your muscles the same length, but you're stretching them out, but keeping the muscles ultimately at the same length. Where developmental is where you're wanting to increase the length of your muscles. The main kind of difference between maintenance and developmental stretch, if you're going to do a maintenance stretch, you'd probably hold it for about 10 to 15 seconds, whereas if you're going to do a developmental stretch, so increasing the muscle length, then you'd want to do it for about 30 seconds to 60 seconds. So you generally hold it for a little bit longer, and that kind of is it in its broadest sense. So I'm going to go through loads of different types of stretching and talk about each different type of stretch, what's involved with it, and all of the ins and outs. So the first type of stretching that I want to talk to you about is static stretching. So static stretching is probably the most well-known form, and it involves moving slowly to a point of mild discomfort, and then holding the stretch for a little while, and you may kind of then feel like you can deepen into the stretch, and then you can go into it deeper if you feel that the muscle kind of relax, and then you can hold it there for a while. So it's where you're kind of like easing gently into it. And how this kind of works is in your muscles there's a receptor called your muscle spindle, and that sends messages to your brain, and the brain responds back, sending messages to your muscle. So as you stretch out your muscle, as you're holding your stretch, your muscle spindles go, oh, whoa, 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 it's too much, sending a message to your brain saying, it's going too much, it's going too far, too quickly, we need to stop. And then your brain sends a message back to your muscle and contracts. And this is where you kind of hold it, and then you're like, it ain't gonna go any further. So then you just hold it and you breathe, and then your muscle spindles go, no, okay, this is actually feeling okay, this is okay. Sends that message back up to the brain, and the brain goes, okay, if it feels okay, and then sends the message back to the muscle to tell it to relax. Okay, so that's kind of the role of your muscle spindles, is that it's a receptor. So it's sending messages to and from muscle to brain to know when is safe for the muscle to relax and when is not. And this is why with your static stretching, you do it nice and slowly and controlled, and you're listening to your muscle spindles essentially as to when feels safe to deepen into the stretch. Okay, so the static stretching is great for developmental. So great to increase the length of your muscle and increase your flexibility. To be fair, it can be used for both maintenance and developmental, but it's particularly good for developmental, especially because you can listen to your body, and that's something that I'm a big fan of. There are two specific types of static stretching, and this is called passive stretching or active stretching. So both under the umbrella of static, but there's passive and active. So passive stretching, this is a static stretch where you use something to assist you with the stretch. for example, when we use a pole or a wall and you place your arm against the pole or the wall and then you push against it and it'll ease and open up your chest. So you're basically pushing against your wall or your pole and it will open up the chest and deepen the stretch in the chest. So you're basically using something to assist you with your stretch. Active stretching, that's a static stretch where you contract or squeeze one muscle to stretch the opposite muscle. So this way of stretching uses the theory of reciprocal inhibition. And this is where if a muscle contracts, so therefore it's called the agonist muscle, if a muscle contracts, the opposite muscle must relax. So, so your opposite muscle is your antagonist muscle, and it will lengthen when the opposite muscle is squeezing. So for example, if we're going to do a chest stretch, so you know when we reach, we're contracting our back muscles to take our arms behind us, and that will be opening up our chest even more. So by squeezing our shoulders and our back muscles to get our arms to come behind us, that will be opening out our chest. So the agonist muscle is our back, so that's the one that's contracting, and the antagonist muscle is our chest, and that's the one that is stretching as a result of our back squeezing and contracting. Another example is if you were to lift your leg, your quads will be contracting and therefore lengthening out your hamstring. So you know when we do our warm-up quite often, I will be lifting my leg up and down in a nice controlled manner. I'm squeezing my quad muscle here and therefore I'll be lengthening out my hamstring as a result. So I'll be stretching out my hamstring. Cool, so active stretching is very good for your maintenance, and passive stretching is very good for developmental. So again, if you're working on improving your flexibility and you're lengthening your muscle, then passive stretching, so using assistance, is better. Okay, the next type of stretching I want us to look at is dynamic stretching. So by the name, you've probably already understood it's about moving. So this is a moving stretch, but it's at a steady and controlled pace. So it's really important as well that the muscle is not under any weight bearing or it's not under any tension. So for example, leg swings, you know when we swing our legs, or arm swings, so I'm doing my arm swings, if I'm rotating my arms around, I'm swinging my arms. These are dynamic movements, there's no weight bearing involved. This is great for warming up your muscles, and it also is very good to use in warm-ups because it also alerts your nerve system, so it gets that more fired up, so it's going to be more responsive when you do the actual movement or practice like what you might be working on during the session of training. The difference, you can also do mobility exercises. So this is where mobility is often used in line with flexibility, and to an extent it is. So mobility is looking at your range of motion. But mobility exercises, the main aim of a mobility exercise is to, or one of the main aims is to basically warm up your joints. So inside a lot of your joints, or specific joints called synovial joints, you have, so take your knee joint for example. Your knee joint, where your femur from your thigh and then your from your shins underneath, they join to make your knee joint, right? And we've got the patella on top, your kneecap. Around your two bones, there's like a waxy kind of substance, and that's called your synovial fluid. Now, if we go straight into an exercise or some form of movement, or if we're going to go straight into a run, for example, and we haven't warmed up, and we haven't done any mobility exercises, then your muscle, not your muscles, your bones can actually hit one another, and this can cause lots of issues in the future where your joints cause loads of aggro, your joints don't like you anymore, or you can actually get brittle bones from it, things like this. So you would be doing mobility exercises to warm up the kind of waxy substance that is the synovial fluid around the joint so that it moves more freely. So think of it like wax, or almost like coconut oil. You know, if you buy like a pot of coconut oil, when it's cold, it's kind of flaky almost, but the moment you warm it up in your hands, it becomes a liquid. So very similar for like your synovial fluid, so it suddenly becomes like honey and it's more fluid. So your mobility exercises, the aim of that is to warm up your synovial fluid and protect your joints better and protect your bones. And you can do mobility exercises which would be dynamic, but you can do weight bearing. So think of this as like your squats or your lunges. These are mobility exercises that are weight bearing. So a squat would not be defined as a dynamic stretch because your muscles are under tension. So it would be more of a mobility exercise. I hope that kind of defines the difference. Okay, so the next type of stretch that I want to talk about is ballistic stretching. So ballistic stretching often sometimes used accidentally as dynamic. Ballistic stretching is different from dynamic because although it's a moving stretch, ballistic is moving stretch at high speed. It tends to only be used if you're going to do a performance. So it's a highly risky way to stretch. I don't recommend it to improve your flexibility. Sometimes you see it when people want to get an end move, but or like example, if you know when you see people try and catch their leg behind them to hold it into a stretch, that is a ballistic stretch. They have kicked their leg up really high, it's not in a controlled manner, kick it up to try and catch it to hold that stretch. So yeah, highly risky because you're at the because basically your muscle spindles will react and go, whoa, this is going too fast. Same way that we talked about with your static stretching, your brain sends the message to your muscle to contract. So if you're doing that mid-flow, then you can break your muscle basically, and that's where you tear your muscle really badly in some situations. So that's why it can be very dangerous to do ballistic type stretching. So it's kind of like an explosive movement, and you'd probably only ever use it in performance. So if you were going to kind of jump into a split midair, right, then that's a really explosive stretch that you do, and probably only used in a performance. Okay, where have I got? I've got my next little post-it note that I wanted to talk to you about. It's called your stretch reflex. So, this is kind of what I explained before. I've kind of already preempted what I was going to say. So your stretch reflex is whenever a muscle stretches very quickly, the muscle spindle within it sends a signal to the brain telling it that it is lengthening its speed. The brain responds by sending a signal back telling the muscle to contract. Oh, I've already mentioned this, but this is basically what that's referred to as. So if that happens and then your muscles contract, that's called your stretch reflex. So that's kind of like the official term to it. Okay, so next type of stretch is a beautiful type of stretch called PNF stretching. So this stands for, and excuse the fact if I can't pronounce the words very well, it's called proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. And there are a few types of PNF stretching. But basically, they all involve contracting muscles to provoke the inverse stretch reflex. So we've just talked about the stretch reflex, and there's another thing called the inverse stretch reflex. I'll go on to that in a minute. So basically, there are a few variations, but all involve contracting muscles to provoke the inverse stretch reflex, which results in the muscles relaxing and strengthening, lengthening. So to better understand PNF stretching, I'm actually going to go through its name in more detail. So proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Proprioceptive, this bit refers to your proprioreceptors. And these are special receptors, including your muscle spindles. So your muscle spindles are a type of receptor, and there's also ones called your Golgi tendons. So they tell your body where it is in space and respond to movements to either relax or contract muscles in an attempt to prevent harm. Okay, so they're like the responsive parts. Your muscle spindles, as we've already mentioned, detect when a change in your muscle length. Your Golgi tendons detect changes in muscle tension. Okay, stay with me, guys. The neuromuscular part of the word, so the N, this bit relates to the nervous system and how the brain communicates with your muscles. Your muscles and brain talk to each other constantly via nerves. They relay information from the proprioceptors about how long a muscle is and how much tension it's under. Okay, so that's the communication bit. And then the facilitation part of the F, so we've done P, we've done N, and then the F. The F, this relates to how you're going to use these body systems to help you increase the flexibility in a muscle. So what I wanted to talk to you about was the inverse stretch reflex. So basically, your Golgi tendon, which detects changes in the muscle. So if a muscle contracts and the tension in the muscle increases, the Golgi tendon sends a signal to the brain. The brain reacts by telling the muscle to relax, therefore increasing its flexibility, increasing and lengthening it. Essentially the opposite of the stretch reflex brought about by the muscle spindles. So this is basically the reverse of it, hence why it's called the inverse stretch reflex. I hope this helps and makes sense. So in short, let me try and explain that in a different way, just in case you got a little bit lost with all of the terminology. So in short, your Golgi tendon tells your brain when the muscle is under tension. So if I'm contracting my bicep, there'll be the Golgi tendon sending a message to my brain telling the muscle it's under tension, the muscle's under tension, you need it to relax. So essentially it will be relaxing. It will then send a message telling the muscle to relax, because the body doesn't like to hold contracted muscles for a long period of time because it's very tiring. Okay, I hope that helps and makes a bit more sense. Some of the terms can be a little bit clunky is my word. Okay, so the two most common types of PNF stretching are called CR stretching and CRAC stretching. So CR stretching stands for contract relax, and CRAC stands for contract relax, antagonist relax. Okay, and it basically describes the method of it. So I'll go to actually how you use PNF stretching CR and then the PNF CRAC, which are the two most common types. So if you were going to do a contract relax PNF stretch, then you'd perform a standard stretch for your desired muscle for around 20 seconds. When you feel your stretch kind of ease by listening to your muscle spindles, you can then ease into it a little bit more and maybe hold it for another 10 seconds, okay? So that's step number one. Step number two, you then contract the muscle being stretched at around 20-30%. So this is basically to activate the Golgi tendon theory. And you can do this by pushing against something, so resisting against something. So for example, when we do a hamstring stretch and we're in our half split position, so we've got our leg out in front of us, it's nice and straight, and the other leg's up on our knee. If I push my ankle into the floor, it is contracting my hamstring. So basically it's contracting it, and that will be activating the inverse stretch reflex, because my brain will then be telling the muscle to relax. So I hold it for a few seconds and then I relax, and because my muscle is receiving the message from the brain telling it to relax even more, it will therefore lengthen more. And this is the theory. So that will be, you kind of hold that for about 6 seconds. So you contract for 6 seconds. So push against something. You might push against a wall, a pole, a partner, a towel, a resistance band. I use the floor a lot. You can kind of use anything, but you want resistance. So that will be, you're holding it for about 6 to 10 seconds. Some people say to do less and do 3 seconds. Some people say to do longer and do 10 seconds. I tend to do about 6 seconds in the middle. That's my preferred way of doing it. But I tend to do anywhere between 6 and 10. Then step number 3 is you release the contraction, and if possible, move further into the stretch. Do this slowly, and remember that you should feel in control of how far the stretch has been taken. So always listening to your body and listening when is too far. So you should never, when you're doing stretching, you should never go into pain. You should go to mild discomfort. Okay, so it will be uncomfortable when you're stretching, but it won't be painful. You should never feel it to be painful. And this can feel very difficult to acknowledge, to recognize where that line is. And it's, to be honest, it's really difficult to explain it as well, because we all have different levels of pain thresholds. We have different pain thresholds depending on where we are in our menstrual cycle. But it's more about the more often you do it, the better you kind of gauge what feels right for your body. And we're all unique. And it's, yeah, the best way I can kind of advise you to learn it, where feels pain, where feels discomfort, is by doing it regularly and listening to your body, and never push it to pain. And if you worry that you are, then pull way back, because if you get a stretch injury, then it's just going to hold you back. It's easier, yes, it might be slower, but it's easier to build it up and better learn your body and where feels like the right mark, than pushing it too far and then ultimately having to start from scratch again once you've had a gap of time to recover from your injury, if you have one. Okay. Step number 4 is, once you're in this new position, you hold the stretch for around 10 seconds. And if you feel comfortable, you can then continue with the process of steps of contracting the muscle and then deepening it again, and then contract for 6 to 10 seconds. And then once you've relaxed, see if you can go deeper. So you can do that a few times. I'd probably recommend repeating it about 2 to 3 times, but you can do it more if you wanted to. But basically, each time you're doing it, it will relax deeper. The difference between contract, relax and antagonist contract is you perform, for the second type, the CRAC stretch, PNF stretch, you'll perform steps 1 and 4 that I've just talked through, but then you follow that by contracting the opposite muscle to the one being stretched. So this is if you were going to be stretching your hamstring, you'd squeeze your quad, because that's the antagonist to your so it's the opposite muscle to your hamstring, so your muscle stretching. So you hold your contracting your opposite muscle. So if you're stretching your hamstring, you'll be squeezing your quad for about 10 seconds. And then you relax and see if you can go a bit deeper. So you kind of add in the extra little bit by contracting the opposite muscle. So this is good. It's a really effective way of stretching for flexibility, but it can be very tiring because you're squeezing your muscles at the same time. I was going to talk through when you should use it. When was I going to say? Oh, yes. So PNF stretching is a tool used when you want to increase your flexibility of a muscle. And the flexibility gained from this type of stretching can be really quite staggering. But this will last for 1 to 3 hours. So you tend to have the flexibility immediately. If you do it often enough, you can create permanent change and increase the length of your muscles permanently. And this is where you can see flexibility changing on a permanent basis, and therefore you can increase your range of motion. So this one, PNF stretching, is I would say is the most effective type of stretching to increase your flexibility, along with static stretching for developmental if you're holding it for a length of time. Okay, I'm going to talk about one more type of stretch, your active isolated stretching. All of these names, you're going to be like, Becky, I've so lost which one was which again. But feel free to listen it back, and I can always recap as well if you wish. Okay, so your active isolated stretching, also known as Matt's method, so named after the person who created it. It uses reciprocal inhibition. So we mentioned this right at the start. So reciprocal inhibition, that's the theory where if one muscle contracts, then the other lengthens. So with the Matt's method, or active isolated stretching, this is where the stretch is held for 2 seconds, then released, and that's repeated 8 to 10 times to increase the range of motion slightly each time. This has, so the theory behind it is that by performing short stretches, the nervous system does not have time to switch on the safety mechanism performed by the muscle spindles, so the stretch reflex. However, like our muscle spindles and our nervous system respond with a fraction of a second. So even if you just like stretch for 2 seconds, your muscle spindles will be reacting so quickly. So there's arguments that this theory it's not basically really backed up by a lot of science, because the science suggests that your muscle spindles will already have triggered before the 2 seconds time, because they do it so much quicker than 2 seconds. But yeah, so basically your developmental stretching with your static stretches and your PNF techniques are probably likely to be more effective. But that's another one, just in case you wanted to know more. I also wanted to mention other methods. So we've gone through loads of different stretching techniques. We've talked about static stretching, passive stretching, which is a type of static, active stretching, which is also a type of static stretching. We've also looked at dynamic stretching, the mobility exercises and how they differ from dynamic stretching. We've looked at ballistic stretching. We've learned more about what the stretch reflex is. We've talked about PNF stretching and the two most common types of PNF, so the CR stretching and the CRAC, and also active isolated stretching. But there's other ways aside from stretching that you can do to increase your flexibility. So I kind of wanted to just really touch on them, because there's other things that you can do essentially. So the first thing I wanted to mention was sports massages. So like highly trained athletes will probably have 2 or 3 sports massages a week, and it's the idea of a sports massage will help to relax you. It helps to reduce stress. It helps to reduce mental stress as well, or mental tension. It increases blood flow to the muscles, and this helps to aid repair and recovery. And essentially all of these things can lead to more relaxed muscles, and as a consequence more mobile joints as well. So by using massage, it can increase your flexibility. Now we can't all necessarily have the time or the money to have 2 to 3 sports massages a week, as much as that would be dreamy. So the other thing I wanted to mention, which is perhaps a little bit more accessible to everyone, is foam rollers, balls and sticks. So you can use like foam rollers, they're like a tube, maybe about this long, so about 50 centimeters long, normally about this wide, and you have them in various different tensions. So some of them are quite soft, other of them are like really hard, and some are in between. So your foam rollers, your balls, your sticks, they basically rely on a technique known as self-myofascial release, so shortened to SMR. In essence, it's self-massage, and it allows you to self-massage. There are different techniques that people suggest with foam rolling. So some people suggest gently rolling over your muscles. Other people say that you should roll upwards. Some people say that you should roll towards your heart. Some people say that you should roll or use like balls. So for example, I use like a little ball in some parts of my muscles to use for rolling. I don't have a foam roller yet, it's on order. We have one in the studio, but I haven't got one at home and I miss it, so I have got one on order. It's just yet to arrive. So yes, if I was to use a ball, some other people say that you can use it in the direction of your muscle striation. So a lot of your muscles are striated, and that means so throw yourself back to when you're in biology or you've last seen a image of muscles, or like, you know, you see the body and it's like just the muscles on the body, and you know they have like the lines and little ridges going down the muscle. Not all muscles have them, but a majority do. That's your muscle being striated. That's a striated muscle, so when it's got the little ridges. So some people argue that you should do it in the direction of your muscle striation. And other people will say that you can roll around and you'll feel it be a little bit niggly, or you'll feel like a knot, and then you should hold it there and use it as like a trigger point. So there are theories and people arguing and experts arguing different methods. For me personally, I prefer rolling it gently over my muscles. I do tend to use it in line with the striation of the muscle. So in line with the muscle. So for my deltoid, I know that it goes down. So when I do my rolling, I'll basically be going up and down the muscle, then move it across slightly and up and down. But I also do use trigger points. I find that works really effectively for me. But to be honest, I'd really invite you to kind of have a little bit of a play, get yourself a foam roller, get yourself a little ball. If you can't get like a myofascial ball or roller, you can actually use like any kind of like hard small ball. That will probably suffice until you can get one. Tennis balls on feet, things like that, you've seen before probably. So yeah, that's my preference. Gently rolling over the muscles. Then I often do it in line with the striation of the muscle, and then I find trigger points. And if I find somewhere that's like niggly, then I'll just hold it there until it releases, and then I can go again. And there's more, if you want to find out more about that, you can have a look at research a little bit more about acupuncture points, because they tend to link up with that as well. Okay, cool. Other things that you can help with relaxation, the other things that can help with increase your flexibility are, I'm just gonna go through them. So yoga, Tai Chi, any form of relaxation, and meditation. So there are a few different other ways that you can use along with stretching to increase your flexibility. So next, all important, guidelines of how often you should do your stretching. So I wanted to talk you through the ACSM guidelines for flexibility, along with some other kind of experts in the field of flexibility. ACSM is probably the most respected health and fitness organisation in the world. It is the American College of Sports Medicine, and they have what they call FIT principles. So they look at the frequency, intensity, time and type. So I wanted to go through their guidelines so that you can kind of be like, okay, that's what like a pretty much the most well-respected organisation for health and fitness in the world suggests. So I thought I'll definitely mention them. Okay, so they suggest that the frequency, so how often it should be done, is 2 to 3 days per week for your general fitness. However, for greater gains in flexibility, you want to perform stretches daily. The intensity, they say how hard should it be. Hold stretches to a point of slight discomfort for maximum benefit. P&F stretches should use a contraction intensity of around 25 to 75% of the perceived maximum before relaxing and moving further into the stretch. Time, so how long should it be done for? For most individuals, around 10 minutes in total is adequate. Those wanting more flexibility will need longer. Stretches should be done when muscles are warm, after an exercise session being the perfect time. Stretches held for 10 to 30 seconds appear to have as big an effect on flexibility as those held for longer. Older people, so 50 plus, although I would argue 50 is perhaps not old, but my preference. Older people, that I'm just reading like for like what they've quoted. So older people may benefit more from stretches held for 30 to 60 seconds. Repeat each stretch 2 to 4 times, aiming to total 60 seconds of stretching per muscle in total. This may be done through 4 times 15 seconds or 2 times 30 seconds. P&F stretches should use a contraction period of 3 to 6 seconds, followed by 10 to 30 seconds held in the new position. And then type. So for the general population, focus on the major muscles of the body, including those around the shoulder girdle, chest, neck, trunk, lower back, hips, posterior and anterior legs, and ankles. Dynamic stretches may be most appropriate for sports people in warm-up due to the decreases in strength and power seen in static stretches used before exercise. After exercise, static or P&F stretching should be used if the goal is to increase flexibility. P&F may be the most effective, but the practicalities of having experienced partners to assist the stretch may be difficult to use this stretch type. Okay, so that's like exactly what they've said. So this is one of my, when I was doing my studies, I've just lifted it straight from there in one of my textbooks. So you've got it pretty much exactly, exactly what they put as their guidelines. However, there are other people who will suggest other things. So I wanted to pull out some other experts and let you know what they've said as well. So there's a guy called Michael Alters. So Michael Alters is a highly experienced former gymnast and gymnastics coach, and he's written a number of books on flexibility. And he says to stretch daily or once or twice a day. Long duration stretches are the most effective for increased flexibility. So obviously he's said a lot more than that, but I've kind of summed it up as what his kind of viewpoint is. I've also pulled out Dan Rosen's perspective. So Dan Rosen, the pole champion legend, he says that it's really important to listen to your body, and if it doesn't feel safe or right, or if it doesn't feel right, then don't do it. He stretches every other day, and he prefers for a longer duration stretch, so to stretch for an hour or 2 hours every other day. But he acknowledges that other people might prefer to do little and often. And he also makes a point that it's not a race. There's a guy called Tim Sanders. Tim Sanders is a former GB international gymnast, and he's an acrobat for Cirque du Soleil and Dracone. So he recommends his. He swears by foam rolling. So he rollers for approximately 40 minutes per training day. So that's kind of like his big advocacy is all about the foam rollers and ball rollers and sticks. So he rolls for 20 minutes at the beginning of a warm-up and 20 minutes at the end of a cool-down. He has 6-hour training days or shows each day. So this length might not be, so he said this length might not be necessary for all people because people wouldn't necessarily use their bodies as much as doing 6 hours per day. And he says, I recommend at least 5 minutes at the beginning and the end of each session. Now, he says that he uses the foam rollers before a warm-up. Now, other people have argued that they shouldn't be used before but instead used once the muscle is warm. I personally prefer to use them when my muscles are warm and then use the foam roller. So if I was going to use it at the start and end, I'd use it once I've warmed up and then I would foam roll. Or, which is probably when I use it most, I would use it post my cool down. So I've done my session and then I've cooled myself down and then I'll have a roll. So I personally disagree with the use of foam rollers at the beginning of a session, but this is what Tim swears by, so you can have a little play with that. So I've kind of thought about what my preference is. So for me, I would do maintenance stretching daily. I love a maintenance stretch. I love a morning stretch to start my day. But I would only do it maintenance, so nothing intense or strenuous. I wouldn't do that every day. So maintenance stretching, happy to do that every day, but developmental stretching, I'll do that 3 to 4 times a week, but listening to my body. I'm always listening to whether I've got DOMS, so if my muscles have got a delayed onset muscle soreness, then I would ease off and I would only do, if I'm experiencing DOMS either from stretching or from my training session, then I will do gentler maintenance stretches and maybe I'll just do a warm up, and I might do some foam rolling if I've got DOMS. Foam rolling is great for DOMS, so I'd normally use that to help with getting that movement coming back into the muscles, but I wouldn't do an intense stretch on my muscles when they ache already. And then what have I said here? So on days of developmental, on days that I do developmental stretching, earlier in the day, I will do a maintenance stretch. So on Tuesdays, when we do our flexibility session, earlier in the day, I have the gentle movement and gentle stretch, afternoon stretch session at 12 o'clock. So I'll do some gentle stretching earlier in the day, and that will improve my flexibility later in the day when I go to do my more intense developmental stretching. So yeah, I sometimes will stretch more than once a day. But yeah, my general rule is maintenance stretch every day of the week because it feels so good. And developmental stretching, depending on how much of a improvement you want to see, but 3 to 4 times a week would be my preference. However, there are other people who will suggest to do it every day. Some people suggest do it twice a day. But they are also training for different things. So I hope that kind of helps give you an overall idea of what makes the best information for you so that you can find what feels right for your body. I also wanted to do top tips. So here are my top tips on flexibility training. So exhale when you move, when moving into a stretch. So basically when you exhale, it decreases your muscle spindle response. It lowers your heart rate and your blood pressure, and it increases the amount of stretch possible in the muscle. So use your breath and exhalation to help get more out of your stretches. Stay hydrated. Dehydrated muscles don't stretch so well. Imagine like a little wrinkly raisin or prune. It's dried out and it will not stretch as much. Whereas if you've got a much more hydrated muscle, then it will stretch more. So keep hydrated. Always listen to your body. So your body will try and tell you the best possible way when it's not happy or when it doesn't want to do something. So listen and respect your body and know that it's not a race. So that's my my final point, was that flexibility and permanent muscle change can take time. It can take years. So feel free to put your all into it and enjoy the journey, but know that it might take a while for you to actually there's no shortcut or magic pill. It can take time, it can take years, and it will probably take years to make a permanent change. But you can enjoy short-term benefits with the PNF stretching, but to see long-term results, you need to be doing it often and consistently for you to have permanent long-term results. The other thing that I was just going to mention as a final point is when you choose to do your stretching. So when you go to sleep at night, your spine fills with fluid. So in the morning, your spine will not be as flexible, and nor will your muscles. So as a general rule, you'll find better flexibility later in the day. There's actually it's well documented of 2 times in the day where you find that you have best stretching, and I can't for the life of me remember where I saw this. I was reading it in my textbook and I thought, I'd forgotten about that, but I thought it was fascinating. It is, I want to say, 11 o'clock in the morning and sometime in the afternoon. I will find it, 2 seconds, because I want to tell you this because it's actually quite interesting. Oh, here we go. Unit 3. Ba, 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 ba. I just thought it was so interesting that we have special times in the day that are supposed to be best for stretching. Oh, here we go. So you may feel that you're a morning person or that you come to life at night. The daily fluctuations, how we feel, blah, 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 blah. We tend to be least flexible in the hours immediately after waking up, and that's because of the fluid in your spine. We generally become more flexible across the day, with 10 till 11 and 4 till 5 cited as possibly our most supple. So there you go. 10 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon are cited to be most flexible. I mean, to be honest, if you were really, I would just go with when you're free, but you don't want to be doing it first thing in the morning, and certainly not doing intense stretching first thing in the morning, because you want the fluid around your spine to loosen up. I hope you have found this really helpful. I know it was a lot of information, but yes, I hope you find it really helpful and a better way for you to understand how your body works in relation to flexibility so that you can get the most out of it. Lots of love.